In a dimly lit apartment building nestled deep within the heart of a bustling city, a sense of foreboding always lingered in the air. Apartment A on the floor was infamous among the residents for the strange occurrences that took place there. It all began with the mysterious disappearance of the previous tenant, Johnson. He had lived alone, an elderly man who rarely ventured out of his apartment. One day, he simply vanished without a trace. Police were baffled, unable to find any leads or clues to his whereabouts. The next tenant to move in was Sarah, an artist seeking solitude and inspiration for her work. She was initially captivated by the vintage charm of the apartment, with its creaking wooden floors and antique furniture. But soon she began to experience a series of eerie events that sent shivers down her spine. One night, as Sarah was working on her latest painting, the lights flickered and dimmed. A cold draft swept through the room, and she heard whispers echoing from the dark corners. Terrified, she called out, but there was no response. It was as though the very walls of the apartment were closing in on her. Things only escalated from there. Objects moved on their own, footsteps echoed in empty rooms, and Sarah often woke up in the dead of night to find strange symbols etched onto her bedroom walls in a dark, viscous substance. She felt a malevolent presence lurking, watching and waiting. Desperate for answers, Sarah delved into the history of the apartment building. She discovered that it was built upon an ancient burial ground, and rumors abounded of a curse that had plagued the floor for generations. Supposedly, those who dared to occupy it were doomed to encounter unspeakable horrors. One fateful night, Sarah decided to conduct a seance, hoping to communicate with the spirits that haunted her apartment. As she lit candles and chanted incantations, a sinister force erupted, causing the very walls to groan in anguish. A spectral figure materialized before her, its eyes hollow voids of darkness. The entity spoke of ancient pain and suffering, of souls trapped between realms, seeking vengeance for the desecration of their resting place. It vowed to torment anyone who dared to reside in it until justice was served. Terrified and with no other recourse, Sarah fled the apartment, leaving behind her belongings and her art. She warned the building's management, but no one believed her chilling tale. Over the years, the apartment remained vacant, its reputation as the most haunted place in the city solidified. The chilling occurrences continued, with each new tenant enduring increasingly horrifying encounters. As time passed, apartment A became a legend, whispered about in hushed tones among the residents of the building. To this day it stands as a grim testament to the horrors that can unfold when one dares to dwell within its cursed walls, a place where the line between the living and the dead blurs into an eternal nightmare. In the dimly lit apartment, shadows danced menacingly across the cracked, peeling wallpaper. It was a place where fear had taken residence, and the echoes of past horrors whispered through the creaking floorboards. Sarah had moved into the apartment with excitement, unaware of its dark history. She was drawn to its affordable rent and the promise of a fresh start in a new city. Little did she know that her decision would unravel a nightmare beyond her wildest imagination. The first unsettling sign occurred on her very first night. As she lay in bed, a faint scratching sound echoed from the closet. Heart pounding, she summoned the courage to investigate. To her relief, she found nothing amiss, attributing the noise to rodents. But it was just the beginning. Soon Sarah began experiencing sleepless nights. Whispers of eerie voices, too faint to comprehend, filled the air. Her dreams were plagued by ghastly apparitions, clawing their way into her mind. Desperate for answers, she began researching the apartment's history. Her findings were chilling. Decades ago, the apartment had been a den of malevolent practices, hosting seances and dark rituals. The tenants who had lived there before her had all fled, driven to madness by unseen forces. Determined to confront the malevolence head-on, Sarah invaded a paranormal investigator named Alex to her apartment. Armed with an array of ghost hunting equipment, they embarked on a terrifying journey into the unknown. As night fell, the apartment transformed into a realm of horror. Objects levitated, walls bled with an otherworldly crimson, and chilling laughter echoed from the shadows. The duo's equipment went haywire, capturing chilling EVPs and spectral images. Drag Sarah and Alex into the abyss. With no other option, Sarah and Alex turned to a reclusive occult expert named Evelyn Blackwood. Armed with ancient incantations and forbidden knowledge, she led a final, desperate confrontation with the entity. In a climactic battle of wills, the apartment became a battleground between the living and the damned. The very walls seemed to pulse with malevolence as the entity fought fiercely to maintain its hold on the apartment. Ultimately, Blackwood's ritual prevailed, and the apartment's dark history was sealed away. But the price had been high, and Sarah and Alex emerged forever scarred by their nightmarish ordeal. The apartment, now an empty, lifeless shell, stood as a testament to the horrors that lurked within its walls. It was a place where darkness had triumphed, a chilling reminder that some nightmares are all too real. In a dimly lit, run-down apartment building on the outskirts of a forgotten city, an unsettling air of dread hung heavy in the air. The building's name, the Whispering Heights, had earned its reputation as a place where unsettling events transpired. Apartment B, located on the 13th floor, was the epicenter of these sinister occurrences. No one knew much about the tenant of B except for their name, Blackwood. Rumors swirled like ominous shadows through the building's corridors, tales of strange noises emanating from within, unearthly whispers at night, and mysterious shadows seen moving behind closed curtains. Many tenants had moved out, citing sleepless nights and inexplicable terror as their reasons. One stormy night, when lightning cracked the sky and the rain poured in torrents, a young journalist named Sarah, intrigued by the apartment's infamous reputation, decided to investigate. Armed with a notebook, flashlight, and trembling courage, she made her way to the 13th floor. Upon reaching the door of B, Sarah hesitated, her heart pounding. She raised her hand to knock, but before her knuckles could make contact, the door creaked open slowly as if beckoning her inside. Fear clenched her chest, but curiosity compelled her to enter. The apartment was shrouded in darkness, illuminated only by the sporadic flashes of lightning outside. Sarah's flashlight flickered to life, revealing a room that seemed to defy the laws of reality. Odd symbols covered the walls, and eerie paintings depicted unsettling scenes. She felt a presence, an oppressive energy that seemed to close in on her. As she moved further into the apartment, Sarah heard faint whispers, voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Leave, they hissed, but she pressed on, her journalistic determination overriding her fear. In a room at the back of the apartment, Sarah discovered a locked door. Desperate to uncover the truth, she found a key hidden under a dusty rug and cautiously unlocked it. What lay beyond was a nightmare made flesh. A room filled with ancient tombs and arcane artifacts, an altar with candles flickering, and a large, ornate mirror that seemed to hold a reflection of another world. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of eerie voices urging her to leave, but she couldn't tear herself away from the mirror. Suddenly, the mirror began to ripple like a dark pond disturbed by a stone. Sarah watched in terror as a shadowy figure emerged from its depths. It was Blackwood, but not as she expected. His eyes glowed with malevolence, and he spoke in a voice that echoed with ancient knowledge. He revealed the apartment's true nature, a gateway to the otherworldly realms, a place where dark rituals were conducted. Blackwood had harnessed unimaginable power, and now he sought to draw Sarah into his sinister plans. With every ounce of strength, Sarah turned and fled, the whispers pursuing her down the corridor. Lightning illuminated her path as she raced to escape the Whispering Heights. She made it out, but the terror she had witnessed in B would haunt her dreams forever. The sinister secrets of that accursed apartment remained hidden, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to stumble upon them, while the Whispering Heights continued to live up to its chilling reputation, a place where the line between the living and the supernatural blurred into an abyss of fear and darkness. In the dimly lit apartment building at the edge of town, a palpable sense of dread clung to the air like a suffocating shroud. It was the sort of place where the elevator always seemed to creak and groan as if struggling against some unseen malevolence. The residents, those few who remained, whispered of strange occurrences that defied rational explanation. Sarah, a young woman with a penchant for the supernatural, had moved into the apartment complex just a month ago. She was drawn to its eerie ambience, the way it seemed to hum with a sinister energy that both fascinated and terrified her. Little did she know that her curiosity would plunge her into a chilling nightmare. One stormy night, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rattled the building, Sarah heard a knock on her door. She hesitated, for she lived alone, and it was well past midnight. Slowly she approached the door and peered through the peephole. A shadowy figure stood in the hallway, drenched from the rain, their face obscured by darkness. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the door a crack and inquired, "Who's there?" A low, raspy voice replied, "I need shelter from the storm. Please let me in." Against her better judgment, Sarah unlocked the door and allowed the stranger inside. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes clinging to his gaunt frame. He introduced himself as Michael and explained that he had been wandering the streets aimlessly when the tempest had struck. Sarah offered him a towel and some dry clothes, and as he changed, she couldn't help but feel a growing unease about her mysterious guest. The air in her apartment seemed to grow colder, and shadows danced in the corners of the room. As the night wore on, Sarah and Michael engaged in conversation. He spoke of strange occurrences in the building, of whispers in the walls and phantom footsteps in the hallways. Sarah, captivated by his stories, began to feel a deep connection with this enigmatic stranger. But as the clock struck M, Michael's demeanor shifted. His eyes, once warm and friendly, turned cold and hollow. He spoke of a malevolent presence that dwelled within the apartment building, a presence that demanded sacrifices to satisfy its insatiable hunger for souls. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the truth. She had unwittingly invited something sinister into her home, something that had used Michael as a vessel to gain entry. Desperate to escape, Sarah rushed to the door, but it slammed shut with an otherworldly force. Michael's laughter echoed through the apartment as he revealed his true form, a grotesque, shadowy figure with elongated limbs and eyes that glowed with malevolence. Terrified and cornered, Sarah tried to fight back, but her efforts were futile against the supernatural entity. She could feel its icy grip tightening around her soul as it dragged her into the darkness. Days later, the police would find Sarah's apartment empty, her belongings scattered, and the walls covered in cryptic symbols. The building remained an eerie, abandoned husk, its terrifying secret locked within its walls, waiting for the next unsuspecting tenant to unlock the door to their own horrifying fate. In the heart of a bustling city, nestled between towering skyscrapers, stood an old, decrepit apartment building. Apartment B in particular had a sinister reputation that sent shivers down the spines of its residents. The walls seemed to whisper secrets, and the air hung heavy with an unexplainable dread. One gloomy evening, a young couple, Sarah and David, moved into apartment B, hoping to find an affordable place to start their life together. As they lay in bed, the couple heard faint footsteps in the hallway, growing louder with each passing second. Panic set in as the footsteps seemed to approach their bedroom door, but when they flung it open, there was nothing there. Just an empty, dimly lit corridor. Over the following weeks, strange occurrences became a nightly ritual. Whispers echoed through the apartment walls, too faint to discern words, but filled within otherworldly malevolence. Shadows danced in the corners of their vision, darting away whenever they tried to focus on them. One evening, while Sarah was alone in the apartment, she felt a frigid hand grip her shoulder. She turned to find no one there, but a chill ran down her spine as the whispered words became clearer. "Leave," they hissed. David, a skeptic by nature, dismissed her claims as mere paranoia. But as days turned into weeks, he too began to experience the unsettling presence that seemed to pervade apartment. One fateful night, David awoke to find a shadowy figure looming over him. Its eyes glowed with an eerie crimson light, and its ghastly form seemed to flicker in and out of existence. He tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. With a guttural growl, the apparition lunged at him, passing through his body, leaving him trembling in cold sweat. Desperate for answers, the couple reached out to a local paranormal investigator, Dr. Amelia Blackwood. She arrived at apartment armed with a collection of tools meant to communicate with the supernatural. As Dr. Blackwood began her investigation, she sensed an overwhelming malevolence in the air. Her equipment flickered and crackled, capturing faint, distorted voices begging for release. She shared her findings with the couple, urging. The apartment's malevolent force intensified. Objects levitated and slammed against walls, furniture moved on its own, and the couple's dreams were plagued by terrifying visions. Sarah's hair began to turn prematurely gray, and David's once robust health deteriorated rapidly. Desperation finally drove them to research the apartment's history. They discovered that a sinister cult had once occupied the building, conducting dark rituals that had left a malevolent residue behind. Apartment B had been a focal point for their macabre practices. With newfound determination, Sarah and David contacted Dr. Blackwood once more, who arrived with a plan to cleanse the apartment of its dark presence. Together, they performed a ritual to banish the malevolent spirits once and for all. As they chanted ancient incantations, the apartment quaked with anger. Shadows writhed and screamed, and the air grew icy cold. The malevolent apparitions materialized, their crimson eyes filled with rage. But the trio stood strong, determined to free themselves from the apartment's curse. With a blinding flash of light, the spirits were cast back into the depths of the supernatural realm. The apartment fell silent, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. In the aftermath of their harrowing ordeal, Sarah and David finally found peace in apartment. They transformed it into a warm and inviting home, free from the horrors of its past. Dr. Amelia Blackwood left, knowing that she had made a difference in their lives. Yet, whispers of the apartment's dark history lingered, a cautionary tale for those who dared to venture too close to the shadows. Apartment B stood as a chilling reminder that some places hold secrets too terrifying to fathom, and that the boundaries between the living and the dead are sometimes thinner than we dare to imagine. In the heart of the rugged, desolate mountains, where jagged peaks pierced the sky and ancient pines whispered secrets to the wind, there lay a dark and sinister tale that had haunted the region for centuries. These mountains, known locally as the Blackened Spire Range, had earned their ominous reputation from the many inexplicable disappearances and eerie happenings that had occurred within their shadowy valleys. The story began with the legend of the vanished village. Nestled deep within the craggy embrace of the mountains, the village had once thrived with life and laughter. But one fateful winter's night, a blizzard of supernatural proportions descended upon the hamlet. The snowstorm was said to have been summoned by an ancient and malevolent spirit, the Frostbinder. Legend had it that the spirit, angered by the villagers' disregard for the sacred grooves that were its domain. As the blizzard raged, the villagers huddled together in their homes, their bodies slowly succumbing to the bitter cold. Outside, the Frostbinder wailed, its mournful cries echoing through the narrow alleys. When dawn finally broke, the blizzard had vanished, but the village had not. The houses were empty and the villagers had all vanished without a trace. The only sign of their presence was the ghostly imprint of their frozen forms etched into the walls and floors of their abandoned homes. Over the centuries, the tale of the vanished village had become a chilling cautionary tale, and the mountains had earned their name. Superstition ran deep in the hearts of those who lived near the range, and few dared to venture into its heart, especially after dark. One gloomy autumn evening, a group of intrepid hikers decided to challenge the mountain's fearsome reputation. Among them were Emma, a fearless adventurer, known for her relentless curiosity, and Jack, a seasoned outdoorsman with a pragmatic disposition. As the group ascended higher into the range, they couldn't help but feel the oppressive weight of the legends that clung to the peaks. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they set up camp in a small, moonlit clearing surrounded by towering pines. They gathered around a crackling campfire, sharing stories and laughter to ward off the growing unease. But as the night wore on, the forest seemed to close in around them, and the wind whispered unsettling secrets in their ears. A sudden, bone-chilling gust of wind extinguished their fire, plunging them into darkness. Panic set in as they fumbled for flashlights, but the beams of light revealed only the dense shadows of the forest. Then, from the depths of the woods, they heard a mournful wail like the keening of a tormented soul. Fear gripped the group as they clung to one another there, flashlights trembling in their hands. The wail grew louder, drawing closer with each passing moment. It was the Frostbender, they were sure of it, and it sought to claim them as it had the villagers of old. Desperation forced them to flee deeper into the forest, their hearts pounding in their chests. Twisting roots and gnarled branches seemed to reach out for them, and the shadows danced with malicious intent. It was a nightmare come to life, a relentless pursuit through the haunted heart of the blackened Spire Range. Hours passed, and exhaustion gnawed at their resolve. Emma, her breaths ragged and frosty in the frigid air, stumbled upon a clearing in the forest, a clearing that should not exist in this labyrinthine wilderness. In the center of the clearing stood a circle of ancient, gnarled trees, their bark twisted and blackened. In the center of the circle, a pale figure stood, its form shifting and ethereal. It was the Frostbender, and its mournful wail had become a chilling, eerie chant. The hikers watched in terror as it beckoned to them with skeletal fingers, promising warmth and sanctuary within its spectral embrace. Emma and Jack exchanged a desperate glance, their options dwindling. With a final surge of courage, they turned away from the Frostbender's chilling allure and plunged deeper into the forest, hoping to find their way out of the mountains and escape the haunting specter that pursued them. As they ran, the night seemed to stretch on endlessly, the mountains themselves conspiring to keep them trapped in their malevolent grasp. The Frostbender's haunting cry echoed in their ears, but they pressed on, driven by a fierce determination to defy the legends and escape the dark heart of the blackened Spire Range. The night turned to gray dawn, and at last they stumbled upon a narrow trail that led them out of the mountains. They emerged, battered and traumatized, into the welcome light of day. Their companions, lost forever in the darkness, were never seen again. The legend of that ill-fated night in the mountains served as a chilling reminder to all who heard it, a reminder that in the shadow of the blackened Spire Range, the line between reality and nightmare could blur, and the mountains themselves held ancient secrets that were not meant to be uncovered. And so the legend of the vanished village lived on, a story of terror and survival in the heart of the mountains, a story that would continue to haunt the dreams of those who dared to venture into the abyss. In the heart of the rugged and desolate mountains, there lay a place that locals whispered about only in hushed tones, for it was a haven of darkness and despair. Nestled deep within the towering peaks, a forgotten village named Grimhaven stood as a testament to the horrors that lurked among the lofty crags. The tale of Grimhaven had been etched into the annals of mountain lore, passed down through generations, as a warning to those who dared to venture into its forsaken realm. It was a place where the line between the living and the dead grew thin, and where malevolent forces were said to roam freely. As the story goes, Grimhaven had once been a thriving community, a beacon of civilization amidst the harsh mountainous terrain. Its inhabitants had lived peacefully, harmonizing with the unforgiving wilderness that surrounded them. But all that changed on a fateful winter's night, when a blizzard of unparalleled ferocity descended upon the village. The storm raged for days, trapping the villagers within their homes and obliterating all contact with the outside world. With each passing hour, the cold gnawed at their souls and despair began to grip their hearts. And then, as if summoned by their desperation, a haunting figure emerged from the depths of the blizzard. This figure was known as the Winter Wraith, a spectral entity with icicles for fingers and eyes that gleamed like frozen sapphires. It whispered chilling promises of salvation to the villagers, offering them warmth and safety in exchange for their eternal servitude. Those who accepted the offer were never seen again, their souls forever bound to the Winter Wraith's icy domain. But there were some who resisted, determined to cling to their humanity despite the relentless cold. They banded together, seeking refuge in the village's old church. A crumbling stone sanctuary perched on a precipice overlooking the abyss. There they prayed for deliverance and hoped for a miracle. As the days turned into weeks, the blizzard showed no signs of abating, and the villagers in the church grew weaker with each passing moment. The specter of the Winter Wraith loomed ever closer, its whispers growing louder and more insistent. Madness clawed at their minds, and some began to wonder if surrendering to the creature's offer might be a lesser evil than facing the relentless cold. Then, one night, as the moon cast an eerie glow on the snow-covered landscape, a piercing scream shattered the silence. The villagers rushed to the windows and saw a sight that would haunt their nightmares for eternity. The church's once solid walls had turned translucent, revealing a ghastly vision of the Winter Wraith approaching from all sides. With no other option left, the villagers huddled together in a final act of defiance. They sang hymns of hope and lit candles, their feeble flames pushing back the encroaching darkness. But as the Winter Wraith's chilling touch reached out to claim them, the candles flickered and sputtered, and one by one they were extinguished. In the inky blackness that followed, the villagers' voices were silenced, and Grimhaven vanished from the world of the living. To this day, the mountains are haunted by the memory of Grimhaven and the terror that dwells within its forsaken ruins. Travelers who dare to venture too close to those accursed peaks speak of bone-chilling winds that whisper the names of the lost souls and eerie lights that dance through the night. They tell of a place where the living and the dead coexist, bound by an unbreakable curse, and where the Winter Wraith still roams, searching for souls to claim in exchange for false promises of warmth and safety. So beware, brave souls, should you find yourself amidst the desolate mountains, for Grimhaven and its terrifying tale are not mere legend but a chilling reality that may await those who dare to tread too close to the edge of darkness. In the heart of the rugged and desolate Appalachian Mountains, nestled far from civilization, there lay a forsaken place known only as Deadman's Hollow. It was a place shrouded in mystery where the trees seemed to whisper secrets and the wind howled with an eerie, mournful wail. The locals warned of the dangers that lurked within the hollow, cautioning anyone who dared to venture there. Legend had it that centuries ago a sinister cult had taken residence in Deadman's Hollow. They worshipped dark, ancient deities, performing unspeakable rituals to appease their malevolent masters. The cult's leader, a man named Ezekiel Blackwood, was said to have made a pact with the devil himself, granting him and his followers immortality in exchange for their loyalty. As the story goes, the cult grew more wicked with each passing year, conducting rituals that involved human sacrifice and the summoning of demonic entities. The mountain itself seemed to wither under their dark influence, the trees contorting into grotesque shapes, and the wildlife disappearing into the shadows. But one fateful night, a group of brave townsfolk, led by a determined sheriff, decided to confront the cult and put an end to their reign of terror. Armed with torches, pitchforks, and a deep sense of justice, they descended into Deadman's Hollow. The night was shrouded in an unnatural darkness as they ventured deeper into the hollow. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, like the agonized cries of souls trapped in eternal torment. As they neared the cult's hidden temple, the air grew colder, and the oppressive weight of malevolence bore down upon them. When they finally reached the temple, they were met with a horrifying sight. The cultists, their faces painted with grotesque symbols chanted in an ancient guttural. Tungu. The leader, Ezekiel Blackwood, stood at the altar, a wicked smile on his face as he prepared to offer a young girl as a sacrifice. The sheriff and his companions sprang into action, but their torches flickered and died, plunging them into utter darkness. The cultists' laughter echoed through the temple as they revealed their true nature. They were not human. Their eyes glowed with an otherworldly malevolence, and their skin seemed to shift and writhe. A fierce battle ensued, but the townsfolk were no match for the supernatural powers of the cultists. One by one they fell, their screams echoing through the hollow. The sheriff, the last one standing, faced off against Ezekiel Blackwood in a final desperate struggle. As the two locked in combat, the very ground beneath them seemed to tremble. A fissure in reality opened and a monstrous, tentacled entity emerged, its presence so horrifying that it defied description. It devoured both the sheriff and Ezekiel, leaving nothing but an eerie silence in its wake. The cultists, now victorious, continued their dark rituals, and Deadman's Hollow became a place of pure malevolence. Anyone who ventured into the mountains near the hollow never returned, and their disappearances remained an unsolved mystery. To this day, the legend of Deadman's Hollow serves as a chilling warning to those who dare to explore the haunted depths of the Appalachian Mountains. The cursed place stands as a testament to the darkness that can take root in the human soul, and the terrifying consequences of making deals with forces beyond comprehension. The mountains themselves seem to weep for the lost souls trapped within Deadman's Hollow, their cries carried on the mournful wind, a reminder of the horrors that await those who tread too close to the heart of darkness. In the remote heart of the towering, snow-capped mountains, where the air is thin and the silence heavy, a group of intrepid adventurers embarked on a journey they would soon regret. They had heard rumors of a hidden valley nestled deep within these peaks, a place untouched by civilization, where nature's raw power held sway. The allure of uncharted territory drew them like moths to a flame, and they set out oblivious to the terror that awaited them. As the group ascended higher into the forbidding range, the world below faded away, replaced by the eerie and desolate landscape of the alpine wilderness. The trees grew stunted and gnarled, twisted by the relentless winds, and the snowdrifts became treacherous traps that swallowed whole those who dared tread upon them. The temperature plummeted, and an ominous darkness descended upon the mountain as night fell. The adventurers huddled around their flickering campfire, seeking solace in its feeble light. The howling wind echoed through the jagged peaks, creating eerie, mournful sounds that sent shivers down their spines. But the worst was yet to come. In the dead of night, a blood-curdling scream pierced the stillness, cutting through the group's restless slumber. Startled and alarmed, they sprang to their feet, clutching their weapons. The scream had come from their fellow traveler, Emma, who had been standing guard. Emma, her face contorted in terror, stuttered as she tried to explain what she had seen. She described a shadowy figure, impossibly tall and gaunt, with eyes that gleamed like burning coals. The apparition had whispered chilling words of warning, words that promised doom to any who dared trespass in this forsaken land. The group's leader, Michael, scoffed at the story, dismissing it as a product of exhaustion and the harsh mountain conditions. But doubt gnawed at their hearts as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the deserted highway, Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel of her old, battered sedan. She had been driving for hours on this desolate stretch of road, surrounded by an endless expanse of dense forest. Her destination, a remote cabin nestled deep within the woods, was still hours away. The only source of comfort was the faint glow of her car's headlights, cutting through the darkness like a lifeline. The radio had crackled into static long ago, leaving her with nothing but the sound of her own breathing and the hum of the tires on the pavement. Her phone had no signal, rendering her completely cut off from the outside world. She knew she was alone, or at least she thought she was. As she drove deeper into the night, strange things began to happen. Shadows darted across the road and eerie whispers seemed to emanate from the forest. Sarah chalked it up to exhaustion and the overactive imagination of a wary traveler. But then she saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the woods, illuminated by her headlights for a brief, chilling moment. It was a gaunt, pale figure, dressed in tattered rags. Its eyes were hollow, devoid of life, and they bore into Sarah's soul. Panic seized her as she swerved to avoid the apparition, her heart pounding in her chest. But when she glanced back in her rearview mirror, the figure was gone. Doubt gnawed at Sarah as she continued her journey, convinced that her mind was playing tricks on her. But then the figure reappeared, this time closer, standing in the middle of the road. Sarah slammed on the brakes, screeching to a halt just inches from the specter. As she sat there, trembling and paralyzed with fear, the figure slowly raised a bony hand and pointed a crooked, skeletal finger toward the forest. A guttural whisper filled the car, sending shivers down her spine. "Leave this place," it hissed, its voice echoing in the night. Without a second thought, Sarah slammed her foot on the gas pedal and sped away, leaving the ominous figure behind. But no matter how fast she drove, the forest seemed to stretch endlessly before her, and the specter continued to appear, each time closer, each time more terrifying. Hours passed, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't risk encountering that thing again. The forest seemed to close in around her, the trees leaning menacingly over the road, their branches scraping the roof of her car. And then, just when she thought she couldn't take it any longer, she saw the glow of civilization in the distance. Sarah burst through the tree line, her tires screeching on the pavement as she entered a small town. The ghostly figure was gone, and she was safe, but the memory of that nightmarish encounter would haunt her forever. She never did make it to the remote cabin in the woods, and she never returned to that desolate highway. The terror of that night would remain with her, a chilling reminder that sometimes, when you drive alone in the dark, you're never truly alone. As I drove down the desolate highway, the setting sun cast eerie shadows across the empty road. The only company I had was the monotonous hum of the engine and the rhythmic thump of my heart. I'd heard rumors of this stretch of road, whispers of something supernatural lurking in the darkness, but I never believed them until that fateful night. The sky darkened rapidly, and I turned on my headlights, their feeble beams barely cutting through the oppressive darkness. I knew I had a long drive ahead, but what I didn't know was that I was not alone on this forsaken road. Miles passed, and my grip on the steering wheel tightened. An unshakable feeling of dread began to creep over me. It was as if the night itself was watching, waiting. My headlights flickered briefly, then went out entirely, plunging me into absolute darkness. Panic set in as I struggled to regain control. Just as I reached for my phone to use its flashlight, a pale, ghostly figure appeared in the middle of the road. It was a woman, her white dress billowing in the wind, her long, dark hair obscuring her face. My heart raced as I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car struck her, or at least it should have. Instead, I felt nothing but a sickening thud, and when I looked in the rearview mirror, the woman was gone. My breath caught in my throat as I realized she had passed through the car as if it were made of smoke. Fear paralyzed me as I sat there, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Then, from the darkness, I heard a mournful wail, a sound that chilled me to my core. It was the woman or something that had taken her form. She was now standing at the side of the road, her hollow eyes fixed on me. With trembling hands, I managed to restart the car, and as I drove away, her anguished cry echoed in my ears. But the horrors were far from over. The road twisted and turned like a serpent, leading me deeper into the heart of darkness. The temperature plummeted, and frost formed on the windows. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, and strange, ghostly figures appeared in the periphery. I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape. My phone had no signal, and every attempt to turn back led me deeper into the nightmarish abyss. The road seemed to stretch on forever, a never-ending descent into madness. Finally, I saw a glimmer of hope, a small, decrepit gas station in the distance. I pulled in, desperate for help. The place was eerie, the fluorescent lights flickering, and the air thick with an unnatural chill. The attendant behind the counter had hollow eyes, and his voice was a sinister whisper as he told me that I was now part of this cursed road, forever bound to its haunting. Terrified and exhausted, I drove on, the road never ending, the horrors never relenting. I had entered a realm where the supernatural and the real intertwined, where fear was my only companion. I knew then that I would never escape this nightmarish journey, condemned to drive this forsaken road for all eternity, haunted by the ghostly woman and the malevolent spirits that roamed its twisted path. As the moon hung low in the ink-black sky, casting eerie shadows across the desolate highway, Sarah gripped the steering wheel of her car with white knuckles. She had been driving for hours, the hypnotic rhythm of the road and the distant hum of her engine lulling her into a trance. The only company she had was the soft crackling of the radio playing an old, hauntingly melancholic tune that seemed to echo her solitude. Sarah's journey had taken her far from civilization, deep into the heart of a dense, ancient forest. The towering trees loomed ominously on either side of the narrow road, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, eager to snatch her away into their dark embrace. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that unseen eyes followed her every move. Suddenly, the radio static grew louder, drowning out the music. Sarah's heart raced, as the road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly into the abyss. The forest pressed closer, the trees leaning in as if conspiring to keep her trapped in this nightmare. She reached for the radio, trying to tune it back to a familiar station, but the dial wouldn't budge. Panic welled up inside her. Then a figure appeared in her rearview mirror. A shadowy silhouette, shrouded in darkness with piercing, malevolent eyes that glowed like burning embers. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, and she slammed her foot on the gas pedal, the engine roaring to life as she desperately tried to escape this sinister presence. But the figure in the mirror was relentless, gaining on her with unnatural speed. Sarah's heart pounded like a drum, her mind racing for a way out. She took a sharp turn onto a side road, gravel crunching under her tires, but the sinister pursuer followed, never losing ground. As the road twisted and turned, Sarah's surroundings grew increasingly surreal. She passed by ghostly apparitions, twisted trees with grotesque faces carved into their bark, and ominous signs that seemed to taunt her. The world around her had become a nightmarish, otherworldly realm. With a final burst of speed, Sarah broke free from the forest's clutches, emerging onto a bridge that spanned a churning river far below. But her relief was short-lived as the bridge began to tremble, and she heard an eerie, echoing laughter that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the river. The bridge collapsed, and Sarah's car plunged into the icy water below. Panic and darkness closed in around her as she struggled to escape the sinking vehicle. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, a strong hand reached through the darkness and pulled her to safety. Gasping for air, Sarah found herself on the riverbank, her savior a mysterious figure cloaked in shadows. "You are not alone in this place," the figure whispered, its voice a chilling mixture of warning and comfort. "The road you've traveled is haunted by your fears. Conquer them, and you may find your way back." With that cryptic message, the figure dissolved into the night, leaving Sarah trembling but determined. She had to face her fears, the nightmares that had manifested on this sinister road. She had to find her way back to reality. The forest watched as Sarah embarked on a harrowing journey through her own deepest fears, battling nightmarish creatures and confronting her darkest memories. Each challenge brought her closer to the truth, to the realization that the road she had traveled was a twisted reflection of her own psyche. Finally, as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, Sarah emerged from the forest, battered but triumphant. She had conquered her fears, and the sinister road had released its grip on her. The highway before her was now just a road. The forest no longer a malevolent force. As she drove away, the rising sun banished the last remnants of darkness, and Sarah couldn't help but wonder if it had all been a dream. But the memory of that long, terrifying night would stay with her, a reminder that sometimes the scariest journey is the one that takes place within ourselves. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the winding road, I found myself on a desolate stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. The gap's signal had long been lost, and the radio emitted nothing but static. My car's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating only a few feet ahead. It was the perfect setup for what would become the most terrifying night of my life. The road seemed endless, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as my heart raced. The faint rustling of leaves in the trees lining the road sounded like sinister whispers. The air grew colder, and an unnatural mist began to roll in, obscuring my vision. With each passing mile, the surroundings grew more surreal. I spotted a figure in my rearview mirror, a silhouette lurking in the darkness. It was far too distant to make out any details, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was following me. I accelerated, desperate to put some distance between us. Suddenly, my car's engine sputtered and died. Panic set in as I coasted to a stop on the side of the road. I tried to restart the engine, but it refused to turn over. In the silence that followed, I could hear the distant sound of footsteps approaching. Terrified, I fumbled for my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. My only option was to venture out into the dark and find help. With a flashlight in hand, I stepped out of the car and began to walk cautiously along the road. The footsteps grew louder, and I could now hear the unmistakable sound of heavy breathing. I shone my flashlight into the woods, revealing glimpses of twisted and gnarled trees, their branches casting eerie, elongated shadows that seemed to reach out for me. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the night. I froze in terror, unable to pinpoint its source. The footsteps grew closer, and I knew I had to move. I stumbled forward, my flashlight dancing wildly in the darkness. As I rounded a bend in the road, I came upon an old, dilapidated house. Its windows were shattered, and the door hung ajar. Desperation overtook fear as I entered the forsaken building, hoping to find a phone or some form of help. Inside, the air was thick with decay, and the walls were adorned with unsettling symbols. I cautiously climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor, where I discovered a room bathed in an eerie crimson light. In the center of the room lay a pentagram etched into the floor, and standing in its center was the source of the scream, a figure cloaked in shadows, their eyes glowing with malevolence. I stumbled back in horror, but it was too late. The figure's gaze locked onto mine, and I felt an icy grip on my soul. Unimaginable terror washed over me as I realized that I had stumbled into something beyond comprehension, something that defied the laws of nature. With a surge of otherworldly power, the figure reached out toward me, and I was consumed by darkness. My consciousness spiraled into a nightmarish void, where time and space lost all meaning. To this day, I have no recollection of what transpired in that forsaken place, but I know that I was forever changed by the horrors I witnessed that night on that desolate highway. The memory of those twisted trees, the eerie crimson light, and the malevolent figure haunts my every waking moment, a constant reminder of the unfathomable terrors that exist just beyond the realm of our understanding. The forest was shrouded in darkness as the moon hid behind a thick canopy of clouds. A cold wind rustled the leaves, sending a shiver down the spine of anyone who dared to venture into the heart of the wilderness on this fateful night. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves hung heavy in the air, a sinister omen of what was to come. Deep within the woods, a small group of hunters gathered around a flickering campfire. They were seasoned woodsmen, but even they could not ignore the ominous atmosphere that enveloped them. As they passed around a battered flask of whiskey, their eyes darted nervously between the dancing flames, casting eerie shadows on the gnarled tree trunks that surrounded them. Old Man Granger, the leader of the group, cleared his throat, his raspy voice breaking the uneasy silence. "Listen up, boys," he said, his eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and dread. "Tonight, we're going after the beast of legends, the Black Widow." The hunters exchanged knowing glances. The Black Widow was a creature whispered about in hushed tones around campfires, a beast said to be born of nightmares and darkness. It was said to have eyes that gleamed like rubies, teeth like daggers, and fur as black as the abyss itself. But the most terrifying aspect of the Black Widow was its insatiable appetite for human flesh. As the hunters made their way deeper into the forest, the howls of distant wolves echoed through the trees, adding to the growing unease. Branches cracked underfoot, and the wind seemed to carry sinister whispers that chilled their bones. They knew they were walking into something far more sinister than any game they had ever pursued. Hours passed, and the hunters pressed on, their lanterns casting feeble circles of light into the oppressive darkness. The forest itself seemed alive. Them with every step. The air grew colder, and the oppressive weight of dread settled upon them like a leaden cloak. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. The hunters spun around, their weapons at the ready, their hearts pounding in their chests. But the source of the scream was nowhere to be seen. It was as though the very trees themselves had cried out in agony. The hunters pressed on, their fear mounting with every passing moment. They found tracks, massive paw prints that left no doubt they were on the trail of the Black Widow. Granger's hands trembled as he examined the prints. He knew they were closing in on their quarry, but he also knew that the closer they got, the more dangerous their situation became. As they continued to follow the tracks, the forest seemed to close in around them, its ancient trees twisting into grotesque shapes that loomed over them like malevolent specters. Strange, ghostly lights flickered in the distance, leading them deeper into the heart of darkness. Suddenly, the hunters found themselves in a clearing, and there, bathed in an eerie, ghostly light, stood the Black Widow. Its eyes gleamed like twin orbs of hellfire, and its fur seemed to absorb all light around it, rendering it invisible in the darkness. With a guttural roar, the beast lunged at the hunters. Panic and terror gripped them, but they fought back. With all the desperation of men staring into the abyss. Shots rang out, and the forest echoed with the howls of the wounded creature. But the Black Widow was relentless, its fangs dripping with the blood of its attackers. One by one, the hunters fell, their screams of agony fading into the night. Granger, the last man standing, fired his weapon, until the beast finally overpowered him, its crimson eyes boring into his soul. As the life drained from Granger's eyes, he realized that the Black Widow was not just a creature of the night, it was a manifestation of their deepest fears, a relentless force of darkness that had hunted them down one by one. The forest itself seemed to sigh in relief as it claimed its victims, and the Black Widow disappeared into the inky blackness, leaving only the echoes of the hunters' screams to haunt the night. The legend of the Black Widow would live on. A cautionary tale for those who dared to venture into the haunted woods on a hunting night. For the darkness that lurked within the forest was far more terrifying than any beast, and once it had you in its grasp, there was no escape. Deep in the heart of Blackwood Forest, a place where even the bravest souls dared not tread, there was a night that would be etched into the annals of terror. The full moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie, elongated shadows through the gnarled branches of ancient trees. The forest was a labyrinth of darkness, and those who ventured within seldom returned to tell their tale. On this ominous night, a group of 5 friends, driven by youthful exuberance and a touch of foolhardiness, decided to embark on a hunting expedition. Their names were Jake, the fearless leader, Sarah, the adventurous tomboy, Mark, the joker of the group, Lissa, the bookish scholar, and David, the quiet and contemplative one. Armed with rifles and a single lantern, they plunged deep into the heart of Blackwood Forest. As the hours passed, the forest seemed to come alive with strange and unsettling sounds. Twigs snapped, leaves rustled, and ghostly whispers echoed through the dense underbrush. The lantern's feeble light barely penetrated the darkness, leaving the friends with a growing sense of unease. Yet they pressed on, convinced that the legends of the forest were mere superstitions. The wind howled as if in warning, but they dismissed it as a product of their overactive imaginations. Soon they stumbled upon a clearing, its grassy floor shimmering with an eerie, pale light. In the center of the clearing stood a gnarled oak tree. Its branches twisted and contorted like the skeletal fingers of a long-dead monster. Mark, ever the prankster, dared Sarah to climb the tree and retrieve a mysterious object he claimed to have seen glinting in the moonlight. With a sense of trepidation, Sarah began her ascent. As she reached out to grasp the object, her hand brushed against something cold and lifeless. She recoiled in horror as she realized it was a skeletal hand protruding from the ground beneath the tree. Suddenly, the lantern flickered and went out, plunging them into total darkness. Panic seized the group as they heard an otherworldly wailing emanating from the depths of the forest. The haunting cries seemed to converge upon them from all directions, and the ground beneath their feet trembled as if the forest itself was awakening. Desperation drove them to flee, but the forest seemed to conspire against them, leading them deeper into its labyrinthine heart. The once familiar path twisted and turned as if mocking their futile efforts to escape. Whispers grew louder, and spectral apparitions flickered at the edges of their vision. As dawn approached, they stumbled upon an ancient, dilapidated cabin hidden deep within the forest. It emanated an aura of malevolence, but they had no choice but to take refuge inside. The cabin was a decrepit, rotting husk with faded, peeling wallpaper that seemed to depict nightmarish scenes of torment and suffering. Shadows danced on the walls, their movements unsettling and sinister. Exhausted and terrified, they huddled together in the cabin's gloomy interior. The wailing in the forest subsided, replaced by an eerie silence that was equally unnerving. Hours passed like centuries, and they dared not sleep for fear of what lurked in the dark. Just as the first rays of dawn broke through the forest canopy, they heard a voice, a haunting whisper that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It spoke of forgotten curses, vengeful spirits, and the price one paid for trespassing into the forbidden realm of Blackwood Forest. The forest, it seemed, was alive with ancient malevolence, a place where the line between the living and the dead blurred into an unending nightmare. The friends knew that they were forever changed by that harrowing night, and they would never again venture into the depths of Blackwood Forest where the darkness held secrets that were best left undisturbed. The night was draped in an eerie shroud of darkness as a blood-red moon hung low in the sky, casting long, twisted shadows through the dense forest. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the haunting calls of unseen creatures. This was the night of the most feared and fabled hunt, a night when seasoned hunters whispered tales of dread around campfires, and even the bravest souls dared not venture into the woods alone. In a remote, forgotten corner of the world, nestled deep within a forest that had seen centuries of secrets and horrors, a group of hunters had gathered. They were not ordinary hunters, they were seekers of the supernatural, those who hunted creatures that lurked in the darkest corners of human imagination. They called themselves the Night Stalkers. Leading this motley crew was a man named Victor, whose face bore the scars of countless encounters with the supernatural. Victor was a man of few words, and his cold, steel-gray eyes held the weight of 1,000 nightmares. His companions, equally as formidable, were armed with an array of weapons designed to combat creatures of the night: silver bullets, blessed blades, and ancient incantations. Their prey for the night was none other than the legendary Wendigo, a monstrous entity said to be born of cannibalism, and cursed to roam the wilderness, its insatiable hunger driving it to commit unspeakable atrocities. It was said to possess the power to manipulate the very forest itself, twisting trees into grotesque forms and conjuring unnatural storms. The Night Stalkers moved through the dark woods with caution, their senses honed to detect the faintest of disturbances. The chilling wind whispered secrets of doom as the moon's crimson light filtered through the dense canopy, casting a ghastly hue on everything it touched. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the very trees seemed to come to life, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers clutching at the hunters' cloaks. Strange, ghostly apparitions flitted in and out of their vision, and the air grew frigid as if the very essence of the forest conspired against them. Suddenly, a guttural growl reverberated through the darkness, freezing the blood in their veins. The Wendigo had sensed their presence and was closing in. The hunters formed a protective circle, their weapons at the ready, hearts pounding in anticipation of the inevitable confrontation. From the depths of the shadows, it emerged, a grotesque creature with emaciated limbs, its pallid flesh stretched taut over its skeletal frame. Its eyes, like two fiery coals, burned with malevolent hunger. The Night Stalkers stood their ground, determination etched into their faces as they prepared to face the terror of the night. The battle that ensued was a maelstrom of chaos and horror. The Wendigo's claws tore through the air, and its banshee-like shrieks shattered the silence of the forest. The hunters fought valiantly, their weapons striking true, but the Wendigo was a formidable foe. It summoned the very elements against them, causing torrents of rain to drench their clothes and howling winds to buffet them. One by one, the Night Stalkers fell, their courage and skill no match for the ancient evil they faced. Victor, the last standing, stood face to face with the Wendigo, his chest heaving with exhaustion. In a final, desperate gambit, he thrust his blessed blade into the creature's heart, piercing its cursed soul. With a deafening roar, the Wendigo collapsed, its form disintegrating into a cloud of malevolent shadows. The forest seemed to exhale a collective sigh of relief as the curse that had plagued it for centuries was lifted. As the crimson moon began to wane, Victor stood amidst the fallen leaves and broken bodies of his comrades. The night had been long and terrifying, and the scars, both physical and emotional, ran deep. He knew that the horrors of the night would never truly be vanquished, but for now, the forest lay still, and the world had been spared from the Wendigo's hunger. With a heavy heart, Victor turned to leave, his steps haunted by the memories of that. The moon hung low in the ink-black sky, casting eerie shadows through the dense, silent forest. A cold wind whispered through the ancient trees, sending a shiver down the spine of the lone hunter, Jake. He knew the legends of these woods, tales whispered around campfires to chill the bravest of hearts. Tonight, he sought the legendary beast, the Shadow Stalker. A creature of malevolent darkness, it was said to possess the power to steal a person's soul with a single glance. As Jake moved stealthily through the underbrush, the forest seemed to close in around him. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot, and the occasional distant hoot of an owl. Sweat trickled down his forehead, but it was not from the warmth of exertion, it was the icy grip of fear. Suddenly, the moonlight flickered and died, plunging the forest into absolute darkness. Jake's heart pounded as he fumbled for his flashlight. The Shadow Stalker loomed before him, its form shifting and undulating like smoke. Its eyes, twin orbs of malevolent crimson, locked onto Jake's. In that moment, he felt his very essence being drawn toward the creature, a force of darkness that threatened to consume him. Desperation overtook Jake as he raised his flashlight, aiming its beam at the creature's eyes. The Shadow Stalker screeched, a horrifying sound that echoed through the trees, and retreated into the inky depths of the forest. Gasping for breath, Jake stumbled back, his heart still racing. He had narrowly escaped the clutches of the Shadow Stalker, but he knew it would forever haunt his dreams. As he fled the cursed woods, he couldn't help but wonder how many others had ventured into the hunting night, never to return. In the small, picturesque town of Willowbrook, nestled deep within the heart of the dense, foreboding Blackwood Forest, summer was a time of laughter and adventure for the local children. A tight-knit group of young friends, comprising Lily, Ethan, Maya, and Noah, eagerly awaited the end of each school year to embark on their annual summer escapades. Little did they know that this summer would be unlike any other, a summer that would etch terrifying memories into their souls. Willowbrook, the four friends gathered at their secret hideaway, a rustic tree house perched high in the branches of the tallest oak tree in the forest. They had spent years building and decorating it, and it served as their sanctuary and headquarters for all their adventures. The treehouse was adorned with fairy lights that lit up the surrounding woods like fireflies, casting eerie shadows on the ancient trees. Their first summer mission was to explore the legendary Witch's Glen, a place shrouded in mystery and rumored to be cursed. Tales whispered by the elders spoke of a malevolent witch who had once lived there, casting dark spells and conducting unspeakable rituals. The forest was said to be a forbidden place, and no one dared to venture into its depths. Undeterred by the legends, the friends set out one sunny morning armed with backpacks filled with sandwiches and flashlights. They entered the Blackwood Forest, the foliage so thick that the sun struggled to pierce through the canopy, casting eerie dappled light on the forest floor. Birds ceased their songs as they delved deeper into the heart of the woods, and an eerie silence enveloped them. The forest grew darker as they ventured further, and the air felt heavy with a sense of foreboding. Ethan, the brave leader of the group, urged them forward. "We can't be afraid of old stories," he declared, though even he couldn't hide the tremor in his voice. Hours passed, and the forest seemed to transform. Trees twisted into grotesque shapes, and strange, ghostly apparitions flitted at the edge of their vision. The once clear path now appeared to shift, leaving them disoriented and lost. Night fell swiftly, and they realized they needed to find a place to set up camp. As they gathered branches and leaves to fashion crude shelters, Maya's flashlight caught a glimpse of a sinister figure lurking behind the trees. She screamed, and the group huddled together, their hearts pounding. From the shadows emerged an old, gnarled woman with piercing, malicious eyes and long, tangled hair. She was the very embodiment of the witch from the legends. The children were paralyzed with fear as she approached, her voice like a whispering wind. "You should not have come here," she hissed, her eyes flickering with malevolence. "This forest belongs to me." With a wave of her bony hand, the trees began to close in on them, roots snaking towards their feet, and the forest itself seemed to come alive with dark magic. Panic set in as the children struggled to break free from the entangling foliage. It was Noah who remembered the old stories. The only way to escape the witch's curse was to speak her true name. He whispered it hesitantly, "Isabella." The witch screeched, her form dissipating into smoke, and the forest released its grip on the terrified children. They fled back through the sinister woods, following Noah's memory of the twisting path, until they finally stumbled back into the safety of their beloved Willowbrook. The terrifying encounter in the Blackwood Forest haunted their dreams for years, and they never spoke of it again. The legend of the Witch's Glen became even more chilling after that fateful summer, a story to frighten children around campfires. The young friends grew up, and the treehouse in the oak tree slowly fell into disrepair, its once bright fairy lights fading into obscurity. But the memory of that long and very scary summer would remain etched in their minds forever, a haunting reminder that sometimes the legends of a place are far more real than anyone could ever imagine. In the heart of an idyllic, sun-kissed town named Willowbrook, nestled deep within the lush embrace of towering pines, 5 young friends eagerly anticipated the arrival of their summer vacation. Sarah, a spirited girl with fiery red hair and freckles that danced across her cheeks like constellations, led the group. Joining her were Jake, the resident jokester with a penchant for pranks, Lily, a bookish introvert whose imagination knew no bounds, Mark, the sports fanatic with a heart of gold, a budding artist whose every stroke seemed to breathe life into her canvases. Summer had always been a time for adventure, and this year was no exception. The friends' families had rented a charming lakeside cabin which they affectionately called the Sunset Serenity, and they couldn't wait to create lasting memories there. Their first day at the cabin was filled with laughter, as they explored the pristine woods surrounding the lake, dipped their toes into the crystal-clear water, and toasted marshmallows over a crackling campfire. The days slipped by in a blur of sun-soaked happiness, but as the sun dipped below the horizon each evening, a sinister undercurrent began to gnaw at their youthful enthusiasm. One sweltering afternoon, the friends stumbled upon an old, weathered map hidden in a dusty corner of the cabin's attic. The parchment, brittle with age, revealed a sinister legend, the legend of the Shadowed Hollow. According to local lore, this dark forest lay hidden deep within the woods, a place where no one dared venture. The map seemed to beckon them, promising adventure beyond their wildest dreams. Determined to uncover the secrets of the Shadowed Hollow, the friends packed their bags with flashlights, provisions, and a sense of trepidation that danced like shadows in their hearts. They followed the map's twisted trail, guided only by the eerie glow of fireflies and a rising sense of unease. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the world around them transformed. Trees loomed like ancient sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air grew thick with an unnatural silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or distant, mournful cries of unknown creatures. Hours turned into days, and the group became disoriented, their once confident steps faltering as they plunged further into the heart of the Shadowed Hollow. Seemed as though time itself had lost its way in this forsaken place, as the sun never quite reached the sky, casting an eternal twilight over the landscape. Their flashlights began to flicker and die, and panic set in as they realized they were utterly lost. Whispers of malevolent laughter danced on the wind, and ominous shadows stalked their every move. The forest seemed to come alive, morphing into grotesque forms that taunted their senses. As tensions rose, they turned on each other, their fear and exhaustion pushing their friendship to the brink. Jake the Joker became unhinged, laughing hysterically in the face of their growing despair. Emily the artist saw grotesque nightmarish images in every shadow, which she frantically tried to capture in her sketchbook. Days turned into weeks, and the once vibrant group of friends dwindled. Each member succumbed to the relentless grip of the Shadowed Hollow, disappearing into the inky abyss one by one. Sarah's fiery hair became a distant memory, and Lily's boundless imagination gave way to endless fear. Only one remained, Mark, the sports enthusiast. He had become a hollow shell of his former self, driven by an unrelenting determination to escape the accursed forest. With the last vestiges of his strength, he stumbled upon a dilapidated cabin hidden deep within the woods. Inside, he discovered an ancient tome, a chilling testament to the forest's dark secrets. It spoke of a curse that bound the souls of those who ventured into the Shadowed Hollow, condemning them to become eternal guardians of its cursed grounds. Mark knew he couldn't escape alone. With grim determination, he set out to free his friends from their nightmarish fate, hoping against hope that he could break the curse and bring them back to the world of the living. But the Shadowed Hollow held its secrets close, and the darkness seemed to stretch on forever, its malevolence insatiable. Mark's valiant efforts were in vain, and he too succumbed to the forest's sinister embrace. And so the friends' summer adventure became a haunting legend in Willowbrook, a tale whispered in fear around campfires. The Sunset Serenity cabin was abandoned, its memory forever tainted by the darkness that lurked just beyond its walls. The friends, lost to the Shadowed Hollow, were never seen again, their youthful laughter silenced by a forest that hungered for souls. The once bustling town of Willowbrook became a place of quiet sorrow, a shadowed hollow of its former self, forever haunted by the memory of that fateful summer. In the small, picturesque town of Whispering Pines, nestled deep within a dense forest, summer had always been a time of carefree adventure for the young friends who lived there. Amanda, a spirited and fearless girl with fiery red hair, was the leader of their group. Her best friends were Jake, a lanky and curious boy with a mop of unruly brown hair, and Emily, a bookish girl with glasses and a penchant for the supernatural. As school ended and the days grew longer, Amanda, Jake, and Emily eagerly plotted their summer escapades. They had heard whispers about a mysterious, abandoned mansion deep in the heart of the forest, and the allure of adventure beckoned them like a siren's call. The mansion, known locally as the Van der Meer House, was said to be haunted by the ghosts of its former inhabitants who had disappeared without a trace a century ago. One sunny morning, the three friends packed sandwiches, flashlights, and a sense of excitement as they ventured into the woods. Tall trees cast eerie shadows on their path, and the forest seemed to grow denser with each step they took. They had only a crude map drawn by an eccentric old man from the town's library to guide them. Hours of trudging through underbrush and crossing babbling brooks led them to the mansion's looming, ivy-covered gates. It was a Gothic monstrosity, an imposing structure that had once been a grand estate but had long since fallen into disrepair. The gate creaked open reluctantly, as if warning them to turn back. Amanda led the way, with Emily clutching her books tightly and Jake gripping his flashlight like a lifeline. The mansion's interior was dark and foreboding, the air heavy with the scent of decay. Broken windows allowed slivers of dim sunlight to filter through, casting eerie shapes on the cracked, dusty floors. They explored room after room, each more decrepit than the last, until they stumbled upon a door at the end of a corridor, half hidden by a heavy velvet curtain. Amanda's heartbeat quickened as she pushed it open, revealing a spiral staircase that seemed to descend endlessly into darkness. Without hesitation, Amanda led the way down, her flashlight casting an eerie glow on the ancient stone walls. The air grew colder, and the friends began to hear faint, whispering voices that sent shivers down their spines. They pressed on their curiosity and the friends began to hear faint, whispering voices that sent shivers down their spines. They pressed on their curiosity and fear driving them deeper into the abyss. At the bottom of the staircase, they found themselves in a vast underground chamber lit by flickering torches mounted on the walls. In the center of the room, a grotesque altar stood, adorned with strange symbols and surrounded by candles. Chained to the altar, their eyes hollow and empty, were the apparitions of the Van der Meer family, their souls bound to this cursed place for eternity. Before the friends could react, a sinister figure emerged from the shadows, clad in tattered robes and a sinister mask. It was the old man from the library, the one who had drawn the map for them. He revealed himself as a disciple of dark magic, and he had lured them here to offer their souls as sacrifices to the malevolent spirits that dwelled within the mansion. Amanda, Jake, and Emily's hearts raced as they fought to escape, but the dark magic was too strong. The sinister figure chanted incantations that bound them to the altar, their voices joining the haunting chorus of the Van der Meer family's ghosts. As the friends' bodies grew weak, they clung to their memories of summer adventures and the bonds of friendship that had brought them to this nightmarish place. With a final surge of determination, they broke free from the dark magic's grip, disarming their captor and freeing the Van der Meer family's souls. The mansion trembled as the spirits were released, and the underground chamber began to collapse. Amanda, Jake, and Emily raced back up the spiral staircase, the walls crumbling around them. They burst out of the mansion just in time to see it crumble into ruins, the cursed building finally reduced to rubble. Their summer adventure had taken a terrifying turn, but they emerged victorious, their friendship stronger than ever. They knew that the memories of that fateful summer would forever haunt their dreams, a reminder of the darkness that could lurk even in the most idyllic of places. But they also knew that they had faced their fears together, and nothing could ever truly break their bond. Whispering Pines would always hold a special place in their hearts, a town where innocence of youth had collided with the malevolence of the supernatural, creating a summer tale that would be whispered about for generations to come. In the dead of night, when the moon hung low in the sky and the stars shivered with dread, a lone fishing vessel named the Eternal Whisper sailed through the treacherous waters of the Bermuda Triangle. Captain Nathaniel Blackwood, a weathered and superstitious seafarer, led a crew of hardened men who had heard tales of the cursed waters they now navigated. The frigid winds whispered ancient stories of ghostly vessels, lost souls, and unspeakable horrors lurking beneath the waves. The crew had scoffed at the legends, thinking them mere sailors' superstitions. But as the Eternal Whisper ventured deeper into the heart of the Bermuda Triangle, strange phenomena began to unfold. The compass spun wildly, as if possessed by malevolent spirits, and the stars vanished behind a shroud of dense fog. Captain Blackwood's unease grew with each passing moment, and he felt the weight of an unseen presence pressing down upon his soul. One night, as the crew huddled in the dimly lit mess hall, they heard an eerie, mournful melody carried on the wind. It was the spectral sound of a forlorn sea shanty echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. The sailors exchanged terrified glances, clutching their cups of rum for solace. The next morning, they awoke to find the sea around them coated in an otherworldly mist. The fog twisted and writhed like a living creature, concealing all but a few feet of water in any direction. Captain Blackwood ordered the crew to sound the foghorn and keep a watchful eye on the horizon, but the dense mist seemed to swallow their calls and obscure their view. Days turned into weeks as the Eternal Whisper drifted aimlessly through the eerie haze. Supplies dwindled, and the crew's nerves frayed. The ship's lanterns flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the deck like phantoms. Each night the mournful sea shanty returned, its haunting melody a constant reminder of their dire predicament. One moonless night, as Captain Blackwood stood at the helm, he spotted a faint, ghostly light in the distance. It flickered like a distant star, beckoning the ship towards it. He couldn't resist the pull of curiosity, and with trembling hands, he ordered the crew to follow the mysterious light. As the Eternal Whisper drew nearer, the light revealed itself to be emanating from the spectral wreckage of a ship long lost to the depths. The ghastly vessel was draped in tattered sails that glowed with an eerie luminescence. Its timbers creaked and groaned as if the ship itself were in agony. The crew watched in horrified fascination as ghostly figures, pale and ethereal, drifted along the deck, their eyes hollow and mournful. Captain Blackwood's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the truth. They had stumbled upon one of the fabled ghost ships of the Bermuda Triangle. It was said that these vessels were trapped between the worlds of the living and the dead, forever cursed to wander the cursed waters, seeking to lure more souls into their spectral crew. Desperation gripped the crew as the ghostly ship drew closer, its eerie inhabitants beckoning them with spectral hands. Captain Blackwood, now a broken man, knew that they had no choice but to resist the siren call of the haunted vessel. With great effort, he turned the Eternal Whisper away from the ghost ship and prayed that they might escape the clutches of the Bermuda Triangle. The waters grew calm, and the fog lifted as suddenly as it had descended. The cursed sea had released its grip on the Eternal Whisper, and Captain Blackwood and his crew sailed out of the Bermuda Triangle, forever haunted by the memories of the ghost ship and the horrors they had witnessed. To this day, no one knows the fate of the Eternal Whisper and its ill-fated crew. Some say they were cursed to wander the seas as ghostly apparitions, forever seeking redemption for their trespass into the realm of the dead. And so the legends of the Bermuda Triangle and its ghost ships continue to haunt the minds of sailors, a chilling reminder of the mysteries that lie beneath the waves. In the darkest depths of the ocean, where the sun's rays dared not venture, there existed a realm shrouded in eternal night. Here, among the inky black waters, a legend whispered through the salt-encrusted lips of sailors, a tale that sent shivers down the spines of even the hardiest of mariners, the legend of the ghost ships. The ghost ships were not like any ordinary vessels that plied the seas. They were the lost souls of sailors and pirates, condemned to wander the ocean's abyssal depths. For all eternity, these cursed ships bore the weight of their terrible deeds and the wrath of vengeful spirits. The ocean depths became their tomb, and their eternal punishment was to roam its inky expanse, forever seeking redemption or revenge. One moonless night, a lone fishing boat named the Whispering Wind sailed into the heart of this cursed realm. Its crew, consisting of Captain Jonathan Blackthorne and a motley group of seafaring misfits, had heard the legends but dismissed them as the ramblings of superstitious old sailors. They were on a perilous quest for a treasure said to be hidden on a distant, uncharted island, and no ghost story could deter them. As they ventured deeper into the cursed waters, a heavy fog crept in, thick as death itself, and clung to the ship's timbers like icy fingers. The crew began to hear whispers on the wind, ghostly voices carried by the unnatural breeze. The men exchanged nervous glances. But Captain Blackthorne's iron will refused to waver. Then, the first sight of terror manifested. A ghostly apparition, the specter of a long-dead sailor, pale and translucent, appeared on the deck. It glared at the intruders with hollow, sunken eyes, its fingers like skeletal claws. Panic spread like wildfire among the crew, but the captain drew his sword and ordered his men to stand their ground. But this was only the beginning of their torment. As the night wore on, the Whispering Wind became surrounded by a ghostly armada, a haunting fleet of spectral vessels, their tattered sails fluttering eerily in the cursed breeze. These were the infamous ghost ships, their hulls rotted, their masts cracked and splintered, and their crews nothing more than the anguished souls of lost sailors. Captain Blackthorne realized too late that they had trespassed into a realm where mortal flesh was nothing more than a feast for the hungry ghosts. Desperate, he ordered his men to raise their sails and make a hasty escape, but the ghost ships moved with unnatural speed, pursuing them relentlessly. As the Whispering Wind raced through the night, the crew's sanity unraveled. They saw the tormented faces of long-dead sailors, heard their mournful wails, and felt the icy touch of spectral hands. Madness descended upon them, and one by one, the crew members succumbed to their fear, their minds shattered by the horrors that surrounded them. Captain Blackthorne, the last man standing, watched in despair as the ghost ships closed in. He knew there was no escape from this accursed realm. In a final act of desperation, he turned the ship toward the heart of the spectral armada, hoping to confront whatever malevolent force commanded these wraith-like vessels. The moment the Whispering Wind collided with the flagship of the ghost ships, a deafening scream echoed through the abyss. The sea itself seemed to rise in fury. Waves crashing against the spectral ships. Lightning flashed, illuminating the nightmarish tableau. In that blinding burst of light, Captain Blackthorne saw the source of the curse, a monstrous, otherworldly entity, half human, half octopus, its tentacles coiled around the cursed vessels. It was the embodiment of the ocean's wrath, a vengeful deity of the deep. With a final, thunderous roar, the deity dragged the Whispering Wind and the ghost ships into the abyssal depths, sealing their fates for all eternity. The sea swallowed them whole, leaving behind only a churning maelstrom of darkness and despair. The legend of the ghost ships lives on, a cautionary tale whispered among sailors who dare to venture into the uncharted waters. They know that the cursed realm beneath the waves is no place for the living, and the wrath of the ocean's vengeful spirits is a fate worse than death, and eternity of haunting, a never-ending voyage on the ghostly ships that sail the dark, unfathomable depths of the sea. In the darkest depths of the ocean, where the sun's rays dare not penetrate, there exists a realm of terror that haunts the dreams of sailors and mariners. This is the realm of ghost ships, cursed vessels that sail the eternal sea, their tattered sails billowing in a spectral wind. These ships are a testament to the malevolent forces that lurk beneath the waves, forces that crave vengeance and eternal suffering. The legend of the ghost ships dates back centuries to a time when the oceans were uncharted and treacherous. It was said that these cursed vessels were once mighty pirate ships, bristling with cannons and manned by ruthless crews. They roamed the seas plundering and pillaging, leaving a trail of death and destruction in their wake. But their insatiable greed and cruelty eventually led them to their doom. One fateful night, during a violent storm, the pirate ships encountered a mysterious fog that seemed to swallow them whole. When the fog lifted, the ships found themselves in a strange and desolate world, a realm between the living and the dead. The crew members were transformed into ghastly apparitions, their bodies decaying and their souls trapped for all eternity. These ghostly pirates became cursed to roam the seas forever, seeking redemption for their wicked deeds. They yearned for the release of death, but were denied it, condemned to sail the cursed vessels that had once been their pride. These ships, now wreathed in an eerie greenish light, became known as the Phantom Fleet. The Phantom Fleet haunted the oceans, appearing suddenly and without warning. Their skeletal crews would emerge from the fog, their eyes glowing with malevolence, and board unsuspecting vessels. They would attack with a ferocity that defied their ghostly forms, slashing and stabbing with ghostly cutlasses that could cut through flesh and bone. Sailors who encountered the Phantom Fleet spoke of their terrifying encounters in hushed tones. They told of how the ghostly pirates would drag their victims below decks, where they would be subjected to unspeakable tortures that transcended the boundaries of life and death. The souls of those unfortunate enough to be captured by the Phantom Fleet would be forever trapped in a nightmarish purgatory, tormented by the vengeful spirits of the pirate crew. The legend of the Phantom Fleet spread far and wide, and sailors began to fear the open ocean like never before. Tales of ghostly ships that appeared out of nowhere and left no survivors became a chilling cautionary tale, a warning of the horrors that awaited those who dared to venture too far from land. But there were those who were drawn to the mystery of the Phantom Fleet, who believed that there might be a way to break the curse and free the trapped souls. These brave souls embarked on perilous journeys to locate the elusive ships, armed with ancient tomes of forbidden knowledge and relics of unimaginable power. The battles that ensued were epic, with the living fighting against the dead, their very souls hanging in the balance. The clash of swords and the roar of cannons echoed through the ghostly fog, as the fate of the cursed pirates and their spectral ships hung in the balance. Some say that a few of these brave adventurers succeeded in breaking the curse, freeing the trapped souls, and allowing them to find peace at last. But the legend of the Phantom Fleet endures, a reminder of the darkness that dwells beneath the waves, a darkness that can never truly be vanquished. And so the next time you find yourself on a moonless night at sea, and the fog rolls in, and the wind carries with it an eerie chill, be wary of what may lurk in the mist. For the ghost ships are real, and their thirst for revenge is unquenchable. They are the eternal terrors of the ocean, the cursed vessels that sail the endless sea, a testament to the horrors that await those who dare to tread too close to the abyss. In the quiet coastal town of Harborville, nestled between craggy cliffs and rolling hills, lived an old sea captain named Captain Harrison. His wrinkled face told tales of a lifetime spent at sea, and his eyes sparkled with the wisdom of countless voyages. Captain Harrison's most treasured possession was an antique spyglass that had belonged to his grandfather, a legendary sailor in his own right. This spyglass had seen the world, gazing upon distant lands and guiding the way through stormy nights. It was a symbol of the enduring maritime legacy that ran through the Harrison family. As the sun dipped below the horizon each evening, the townsfolk would gather at the small harbor where Captain Harrison would regale them with stories of his seafaring adventures. His voice, Gravelly from years of salty air spun tales of ghost ships, hidden treasures and encounters with majestic whales. He spoke of the camaraderie among sailors, the thrill of discovery, and the solemnity of storms. One brisk autumn evening, Captain Harrison shared a story that brought tears to the eyes of all who listened. It was about the first time he had ever captained his own ship, the Golden Gull. The vessel, though small, was his pride and joy. He recounted how they had battled fierce waves and a relentless tempest for days on end, until finally they spotted a distant lighthouse, a beacon of hope cutting through the darkness. As he told the story, Captain Harrison held his grandfather's spyglass in his trembling hands, as if channeling the strength of his forebears. The townsfolk leaned in, captivated by his every word, feeling the salt spray on their faces and the wind in their hair. "Remember, my dear friends," Captain Harrison said with a glint in his eye, "ships are more than just wood and iron, they carry the dreams of those who sail them. They are a testament to human resilience and our unquenchable thirst for adventure. As long as there are ships on the sea, there will always be stories to tell." With those words, Captain Harrison raised the spyglass to his eye, scanned the horizon and smiled, knowing that the legacy of the sea would endure, passed down through the generations, just as his grandfather had passed on the cherished spyglass. And so in Harborville, the stories of ships and sailors lived on, carried by the wind and the waves, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who ventured into the vast and mysterious ocean, seeking both adventure and a place to call home. The night was draped in an inky blackness that seemed to swallow every glimmer of hope. Thunder rumbled ominously in the distance as thick, stormy clouds blotted out the moon's feeble light. It was the kind of night that made even the bravest souls shudder with unease, and on this particular night, a solitary gas station stood as an eerie sentinel at the edge of a desolate highway. Nestled in the heart of nowhere, the gas station had the look of a place long forgotten by time. Its neon sign, once bright and beckoning, now flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows on the cracked pavement below. The pumps were rusty and creaking, barely clinging to life, like old relics in a graveyard of forgotten dreams. A lone figure, Jake, pulled his battered pickup truck into the station. The engine sputtered to a stop, and he cursed under his breath. He had been driving for hours, desperate for gas to continue his journey through the desolate night. With a heavy sigh, he grabbed his wallet and stepped out into the eerie silence. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding as Jake approached the gas pump. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead cast an eerie, greenish hue, making everything seem surreal. He tried to ignore the unsettling feeling that something was terribly wrong. Jake inserted his credit card and punched in his pen, but the machine just beeped angrily and displayed an error message. Frustration gnawed at him as he tried again, with the same result. He glanced around, feeling increasingly isolated and vulnerable in the eerie silence. A voice crackled through the ancient intercom system, making Jake jump. "Sorry, sir, but we don't accept cards tonight," it said, sounding mechanical and distant. "What do you mean you don't accept cards?" Jake shouted, his irritation mounting. "I need gas, and I don't have cash." There was a long, eerie silence before the voice replied, "You'll have to find another way, sir." Jake's heart sank. He didn't have a choice. He glanced around the gas station and noticed an old payphone, its receiver hanging limply. He scrounged through his pockets and found a handful of change. Desperation drove him to the payphone, and he dialed his friend's number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, but there was no answer. Jake's frustration grew as he pounded the receiver, demanding an answer. Finally, the line clicked, and a familiar voice came through, distorted and filled with static. "Jake, is that you?" the voice said, sounding fearful. "Yeah, it's me," Jake replied, relief washing over him. "Listen, I'm stranded at this creepy gas station. Can you come pick me up?" There was a long pause, and then the voice on the other end said, "Jake, get out of there. Leave the truck. Walk away. Don't look back." Confused and alarmed, Jake demanded an explanation, but the voice was suddenly cut off. The payphone went dead, and the oppressive silence of the gas station returned. Panic surged through Jake as he hung up the phone. He couldn't understand why his friend had sounded so terrified. He scanned the desolate surroundings, his eyes drawn to the gas station's decrepit building. It seemed to loom over him, an ominous presence in the darkness. Just as Jake was about to make a run for it, he heard a faint rustling in the shadows. He froze, every muscle in his body tense, and strained his eyes to see. Something moved in the darkness, something unnatural. The night seemed to come alive with unseen horrors. Suddenly, the gas station's lights flickered and died, plunging Jake into utter darkness. He fumbled for his phone, the only source of light he had left. As the screen illuminated his surroundings, he wished it hadn't. Figures, grotesque and otherworldly, moved towards him from all directions. Their eyes gleamed with malevolence, their limbs twisted and contorted. They whispered eerie, incomprehensible words, and Jake's mind reeled with fear. He turned and ran, his heart pounding in his chest, but the creatures pursued him relentlessly. As he sprinted through the night, their chilling laughter echoed in his ears. The gas station, now a sinister monument to his terror, receded into the distance. Hours later, a passing motorist found Jake, battered and bruised, by the side of the road. He was incoherent, his eyes filled with unspeakable horror. He could only mutter one word over and over again: "Run." To this day, Jake's tale is told in hushed tones around campfires, a cautionary tale of the gas station of desolation, where the night comes alive with terrors that defy explanation. Those who hear it shudder, for they know that on the darkest of nights, in the loneliest of places, evil can take many forms. And the gas station at night is a place where nightmares come to life. This snippet was generated in Yandex Cloud Speakticket. It was a moonless night, with clouds looming overhead like ominous specters. The small town of Harrowville, nestled deep within the darkened woods of Vermont, was a place where the old and eerie still held sway. The gas station, an isolated outpost of civilization, stood at the edge of the forest. It was a relic from a bygone era, a lone beacon in the inky blackness of the night. Tommy, a wary trucker on a cross-country journey, pulled into the gas station. The desolation of the place gave him an unsettling feeling, but his fuel gauge was perilously low. The flickering fluorescent lights cast eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. An unsettling stillness enveloped the station. The sole attendant, a grizzled man named Old Jake, leaned against the peeling paint of the station's walls. His eyes were hollow, his demeanor distant. He greeted Tommy with a curt nod, his voice croaking like the rustling leaves of the surrounding forest. "Fill her up." Old Jake's words sent a shiver down Tommy's spine. "Yeah, please," Tommy replied, handing over his credit card. As the gas flowed into Tommy's truck, the chilling silence was broken only by the distant howls of unseen creatures. Tommy's eyes scanned the area, catching glimpses of strange, shadowy figures moving in the trees. Fear clung to his heart like a vise. Old Jake finished pumping the gas and handed back the card, his hand cold as ice. "Be careful out there," he warned. Tommy nodded, his instincts urging him to leave this forsaken place. As he pulled away from the pump, a bone-chilling scream pierced the night, echoing through the forest like a haunting melody. Tommy's heart raced, and he slammed on the brakes. He saw her then, a young woman in tattered clothes, her face contorted in terror, stumbling towards him from the darkness of the woods. Her frantic cries for help chilled him to the core. Tommy threw open his door and rushed to her side. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice trembling. "They're coming," she gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "You have to get out of here. Before Tommy could react, a group of shadowy figures emerged from the trees. Their faces were obscured by hooded cloaks, and they moved with an unnatural grace. They encircled Tommy and the young woman, their eyes gleaming with malevolence. "What do you want to?" Tommy demanded, his fear giving way to anger. Old Jake appeared among the cloaked figures, his face twisted into a sinister grin. "We need a sacrifice," he hissed, revealing a dagger gleaming in the pale light. Tommy and the young woman tried to flee, but the cloaked figures moved with an uncanny swiftness, blocking their path. Desperation gripped Tommy as he realized the dire predicament they were in. Just when all hope seemed lost, a deafening roar erupted from the forest, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The cloaked figures hesitated, their attention drawn to the forest's edge. A colossal, nightmarish creature emerged from the darkness, a monstrous amalgamation of claws and teeth, a guardian of the woods. It swept its massive, scaly tail, sending the cloaked figures sprawling. Tommy and the young woman seized the opportunity to escape, sprinting towards the safety of Tommy's truck. The gas station and its eerie inhabitants were swallowed by the encroaching forest, the unearthly cries of the cloaked figures fading into the night. Tommy's truck roared to life, and he sped away from the nightmare, the gas station shrinking into the distance. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, Tommy and the young woman reached the safety of a nearby town, their hearts still pounding from the horrors they had witnessed. They exchanged a knowing glance, silently acknowledging the unspeakable evil that lurked in the depths of that forsaken gas station at night, a place where darkness held dominion. And the line between the living and the supernatural was dreadfully thin. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desolate stretch of highway, an eerie silence settled over the gas station. Nestled in the heart of nowhere, it was the last stop for miles, a dimly lit oasis in the midst of a vast, empty wilderness. Jake had been driving for hours, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. The flickering neon sign that read "Gas and Go" seemed like a beacon of hope. He pulled his beat-up sedan into the parking lot, the crunch of gravel beneath his tires breaking the silence. The station's lone attendant, an elderly man named Hank, sat perched behind the counter, a flickering fluorescent light casting ominous shadows on his wrinkled face. Jake, his heart pounding in his chest, got out of the car and walked toward the gas pumps. The night air was thick with an unsettling stillness. A bitter chill hung in the air, making his breath visible as he exhaled. The station's buzzing fluorescent lights struggled to penetrate the dense fog that had rolled in, reducing visibility to mere feet. As Jake began to pump gas, he noticed that the distant hum of the highway had faded into nothingness, leaving behind only the low, sinister buzz of the flickering lights. He glanced over at Hank, who was staring blankly at a screen behind the counter. On the screen, a grainy image showed a series of missing persons posters, each with the face of a person who had disappeared in the area over the years. Unease crept over Jake, but he shrugged it off as paranoia. He had been driving for hours after all, and the isolation of the gas station was playing tricks on his mind. He finished pumping gas and walked over to the counter to pay. "Pretty quiet night, ho?" Jake said, attempting to break the tension. Hank didn't respond. He just continued to stare at the screen, his eyes glazed over. Jake's unease deepened, but he handed over his credit card and Hank slowly rang up the purchase. As the receipt printed, Hank's expression shifted from blank to something more unsettling, a sly grin that sent a shiver down Jake's spine. Jake quickly grabbed his receipt and headed back to his car, wanting nothing more than to put the gas station behind him. But as he turned the key in the ignition, the engine sputtered and died. He tried again and again, but the car refused to start. Miles from civilization. He got out of the car and walked back to the gas pumps, desperate for help. Hank had vanished from the counter. "Hello?" Jake called out, his voice trembling. "I need help with my car." No response. The only sound was the low hum of the flickering lights. Jake's heart raced as he walked around the station searching for any sign of Hank. That's when he saw a flicker of movement near the old maintenance shed behind the station. With trepidation, Jake approached the shed, the creaking of the rusted door making him flinch. As he pushed it open, a foul smell hit him like a punch to the gut. Inside, the walls were adorned with grotesque, blood-smeared symbols, and the floor was littered with human bones. In the center of the shed, Hank stood, his grin wider and more malevolent than ever. He held a wicked-looking blade in one hand, and a sinister ritual circle surrounded him. "You should have kept driving," Hank hissed, his voice now cold and unnatural. Jake stumbled backward, terror gripping him like a vice. He turned and sprinted back toward the gas station, but as he reached the door, it slammed shut with a deafening crash. Trapped inside, he frantically looked for an escape. Suddenly, the lights overhead exploded, plunging the station into darkness. The only source of light now was the hellish glow of the ritual circle in the shed. Jake could hear Hank's eerie chanting growing louder, the words echoing through the station. In the pitch-black darkness, Jake felt a cold hand grab his shoulder. He screamed, but it was too late. The gas station had become a nightmarish trap, and he was just another victim of its sinister secrets. Hours later, the sun began to rise, casting its warm light on the gas station once more. But there was no sign of Jake, only the flickering neon sign that read gas and go. Standing as a grim reminder of the horrors that had unfolded there that fateful night. And as the first customers of the day pulled into the parking lot, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong about the place, something that lurked just beneath the surface, waiting for its next victim to arrive. Once upon a moonless night, in a remote corner of the world, a group of intrepid travelers set out on a journey that would forever haunt their souls. The year was, and the destination was a forsaken village known as Blackthorn Hollow, nestled deep within the shadowy embrace of the Appalachian Mountains. It was a place whispered about in hushed tones, a place shrouded in legends of the macabre and the inexplicable. The travelers, 5 in total, came from disparate backgrounds, drawn together by an insatiable curiosity for the supernatural. There was Samuel, a seasoned paranormal investigator, with a mop of unruly hair and a weathered face that bore witness to countless horrors. His reputation preceded him, having faced malevolent spirits and vengeful specters across the globe. Beside him was Emily, a skeptical journalist with a penchant for uncovering the truth. She had been assigned to chronicle their journey, hoping to debunk the myths surrounding Blackthorn Hollow. Her sharp wit and logical mind served as a counterbalance to the growing unease that hung in the air. The trio of brothers Benjamin, Michael, and Thomas hailed from a long line of occult enthusiasts, their family's obsession with the supernatural dating back generations. Armed with an array of arcane knowledge and a cache of ancient artifacts, they joined the expedition as experts in the occult, eager to test the boundaries of their craft. As the travelers ventured deeper into the heart of the Appalachian wilderness, the forests grew denser. And the air grew heavier with an oppressive sense of foreboding. The path ahead twisted and turned like a serpentine nightmare, leading them ever closer to their destination. Blackthorn Hollow, it was said, had been cursed for centuries. Its history was a dark tapestry woven with tales of witch trials, demonic pacts, and an ancient, malevolent force that had laid waste to all who had dared to tread upon its cursed soil. The village had been abandoned for generations, and those who had once dwelled there had vanished without a trace. As the travelers approached the outskirts of Blackthorn Hollow, they encountered a gnarled, dead tree, its branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. On its bark, strange symbols were etched, symbols that seemed to writhe and shift as though alive. It was a clear warning, a sign that they had entered a realm where the boundaries between the living and the dead were blurred. The village itself appeared frozen in time, as if the very essence of life had been sucked from it. Rotting wooden houses with shattered windows lined the streets, and the air was thick with an otherworldly silence. No birds chirped, no wind whispered, only the travelers' footsteps echoed in the desolation. As night fell, the group took shelter in the decaying remains of the village inn, a place once bustling with life and laughter. Samuel set up his equipment to capture any spectral evidence, while Emily scribbled furiously in her journal, recounting every chilling detail. The brothers, invoking ancient incantations, attempted to commune with the spirits that lingered in the shadows. It was then that the travelers realized they were not alone. Flickering apparitions of long-dead villagers, their faces twisted in agony, began to materialize before their very eyes. Unearthly whispers filled the air, a cacophony of torment and despair. The spirits were not content with merely manifesting. They unleashed a barrage of malevolent attacks, flinging objects through the air, shattering windows, and slamming doors shut with an otherworldly force. Samuel's equipment recorded chilling yips of voices from the beyond, uttering dire warnings and cryptic prophecies. Emily's skepticism began to crumble as she witnessed the horrors unfolding around her. The brothers' incantations grew desperate, their faces pale with terror as they realized the ancient force they had awakened was far more potent than they had ever imagined. As the night wore on, the travelers found themselves trapped in a nightmarish purgatory, with no escape from the relentless onslaught of vengeful spirits. The very fabric of reality seemed to unravel, and time lost all meaning. Shadows danced and writhed, and the air grew thick with a palpable malevolence. In their darkest hour, the travelers huddled together, their faces etched with terror. Samuel, a man who had faced countless horrors, knew they were teetering on the brink of oblivion. With grim determination, he devised a desperate plan, one that involved confronting the ancient evil head-on. The travelers, armed with incense, protective wards, and their unwavering resolve, ventured deep into the heart of Blackthorn Hollow. There, in a desecrated church that had once been a place of solace, they faced the malevolent force that had plagued the village for centuries. What transpired in that accursed church is a tale too harrowing to recount in its entirety. Suffice it to say, the battle between the living and the dead raged with a ferocity that defied mortal comprehension. It was a battle not just for survival but for the very souls of the travelers, their fates entwined with the dark history of Blackthorn Hollow. In the end, through sheer determination and a sacrifice that would haunt their dreams for the rest of their days, the travelers managed to bind the ancient evil and restore a semblance of peace to Blackthorn Hollow. But the scars, both physical and spiritual, would linger for a lifetime. They emerged from the cursed village forever changed, their lives irrevocably intertwined with the malevolent force they had encountered. The journey had exacted a terrible toll, leaving them with a chilling understanding that some mysteries of the universe should never be explored, and some places are best left undisturbed. And so the legend of Blackthorn Hollow persisted, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires and in the dimly lit corners of the world. A tale of a journey into darkness, where the line between the living and the dead blurred, and the price of curiosity was paid in blood and terror. The wind howled like a banshee as I stood at the edge of the desolate train station, the only living soul in sight. It was a place that time seemed to have forgotten, nestled deep in the heart of a dense ancient forest. The trees loomed overhead, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, casting eerie, shifting shadows on the rusted train tracks that led to nowhere. I had embarked on this ill-fated journey after hearing whispers of mysterious destination hidden in the depths of this forsaken forest. The locals had warned me, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty, but my curiosity had pushed me forward, compelling me to uncover the truth behind the legends. The train arrived with a screech of metal against metal, its once vibrant colors faded to a sickly gray. It was like a relic from a bygone era, an unsettling relic that sent shivers down my spine. As I stepped aboard, the doors clanged shut behind me, sealing my fate. The journey had begun. The inside of the train was just as eerie as the station, with dim, flickering lights that cast eerie, dancing shadows on the cracked leather seats. The air was heavy with a strange, musty odor, and the windows were obscured by a thick layer of grime, preventing me from seeing the world outside. I was the only passenger on this ghostly train, or so I thought. As the train rattled and creaked along the tracks, I began to hear faint whispers, voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, their words a haunting, discordant chorus that sent a chill through my bones. Time seemed to warp and twist as the train continued its relentless journey through the forest. Hours turned into days, and days into weeks, or so it seemed. I lost all sense of time and reality, my mind trapped in a nightmarish limbo. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the train screeched to a halt. I stumbled out onto a platform that seemed to float in the midst of an inky abyss. The darkness was absolute, and the only light came from a blood-red moon that hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the surreal landscape. As I ventured further into this desolate place, I began to see nightmarish creatures lurking in the shadows, grotesque, otherworldly beings with twisted forms and malevolent eyes. They moved silently, watching me with a hunger that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to run, but my footsteps echoed loudly in the oppressive silence, drawing the attention of the creatures. They closed in, their grotesque forms closing in around me. I could feel their icy breath on my skin, and their bony fingers reaching out to touch me. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, a blinding light erupted from the ground, engulfing me in a searing, white-hot fire. They were consumed by the light. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the light vanished, leaving me standing alone in the darkness once more. I stumbled back to the train station, my mind shattered by the horrors I had witnessed. The train was gone, and the forest had returned to its eerie, silent stillness. I had survived, but at what cost? To this day, I cannot forget the terror I experienced on that ill-fated journey. The forest and its secrets remained shrouded in darkness. Voice synthesis performed by Yandex Cloud Speech Ticket. Place where nightmares come to life, and the boundaries between reality and the supernatural blur. I can only hope that my story serves as a warning to those who dare to venture into the unknown, for there are some mysteries that are best left undiscovered. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the desolate stretch of highway, Sarah and Mark found themselves driving through an unfamiliar and eerie landscape. They had taken a detour to avoid a traffic jam on the main road, and now they were surrounded by dense woods that seemed to swallow the road whole. Their GPS signal had been lost for miles, leaving them with no choice but to continue down this narrow, winding road. The only source of light was their dim headlights, which barely penetrated the darkness ahead. Sarah's unease grew with every passing mile. The road seemed to stretch on forever, with no signs of civilization in sight. She glanced at Mark, who was gripping the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. "We should have never taken this shortcut," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Mark nodded, his eyes fixed on the road. "I know, but we can't turn back now. There's no place to turn around." As they continued to drive, the air inside the car grew colder, and a thick fog began to roll in, obscuring their vision even further. The oppressive silence was broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl in the distance. Suddenly, Mark slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a screeching halt. In the middle of the road, illuminated by their headlights, was a child's tricycle, its rusted frame and tattered wheels a stark contrast to the surrounding darkness. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as they stared at the ominous sight. "What kind of place is this?" she muttered. Mark put the car in reverse, intending to turn around and find another route, but the engine sputtered and died. Panic set in as he tried to restart it, but the car remained lifeless. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, her voice trembling. They got out of the car and, with their flashlight in hand, cautiously approached the tricycle. It stood there alone, a chilling reminder of the unknown horrors that lurked in the darkness. As they turned to head back to the car, they heard the faint laughter of a child echoing through the woods, sending shivers down their spines. They swung their flashlight around but saw nothing. The laughter grew louder, closer, and more disturbing. In a state of sheer terror, they ran back to the car, pounding on the doors to be let in. But the doors remained locked and the windows fogged up, obscuring their view of the outside world. The child's laughter grew louder, more sinister, and then the tricycle started to move on its own, rolling towards them with an eerie creaking sound. Sarah and Mark screamed, pounding on the windows, but the car refused to start. The tricycle drew closer, and in the dim glow of the foggy windows, they saw the pale face of a child, eyes hollow and black, grinning at them from the darkness. The tricycle crashed into the car, and everything went black. The next morning, a search party found the abandoned car deep in the woods, its engine dead, and its occupants vanished without a trace. To this day, the story of Sarah and Mark's terrifying journey down that haunted road serves as a warning to all who dare to take the shortcut through the woods, for it is said that once you enter, you may never return. As the train rattled through the desolate countryside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The other passengers appeared oblivious, lost in their own worlds, but I couldn't ignore the eerie silence that had enveloped the entire carriage. I decided to get up and explore, hoping to find an explanation for this unsettling quiet. The train's narrow corridor was dimly lit, and my footsteps echoed ominously as I moved further into the darkness. A chill ran down my spine as I reached the last carriage, and there I discovered the source of the dread. The conductor's compartment was empty, the door ajar, and his cap lay discarded on the floor. Panic gnawed at my chest as I rushed back to my seat, frantically searching for my phone. But the device had no signal, and my fellow passengers remained oddly indifferent to my growing distress. As the train hurtled onward, the windows transformed into twisted, nightmarish scenes. Distorted figures pressed against the glass, their faces contorted in agony. Desperate cries filled the air, yet no one else seemed to hear them. Suddenly, the train screeched to a halt, throwing us forward. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows. I dared to look outside, only to find a decrepit station surrounded by overgrown trees. The platform was empty save for a figure standing at the edge, their back turned to me. A guttural whisper echoed through the carriage, sending shivers down my spine. "You shouldn't have come here." I turned to see my fellow passengers, their eyes vacant, mouths agape, repeating the same sinister warning. I knew then that I was trapped, a prisoner of this haunted train, hurtling into the abyss with no hope of escape.